Okay, welcome, and thank you for joining us. I also want to thank those joining us online. I'm Gloria Palmer, the Executive Director of Green Mountain Academy for Lifelong Learning. We have lots of great programming coming up: lectures, workshops, cooking classes, and documentary screenings. But what I would like to tell you about is the Manhattan Short Film Festival. That is a global event, and it's happening in Manchester again this year. It's on Saturday, October 7th at 7 p.m. in the Riley Center for the Arts at Burr & Burton Academy. It is one of my favorite annual events, 10 short films from 8 countries, and we, the audience, get to vote on our favorite film. The films of the past have been remarkable, some of them serious and moving, others light and funny, all of them entertaining and artfully produced. I can't say enough about it. Tickets are $12 and available on our website, and I hope you will attend. I'd like to thank the Manchester Community Library for letting us hold tonight's program here. And I'd like to thank GNAT-TV for videotaping this program, as they do so many of them, and for running the live stream feature. Please silence your cell phones. Right on cue. And during Q&A, we will have a microphone available, so please raise your hand and wait for the mic to come to you. This evening's guest spent her childhood on a small farm in Sunderland, Vermont, where she was first introduced to beekeeping while working with her dad on his hobby hive. Following her Burr & Burton graduation and a gap year spent during a National Outdoor Leadership Semester, and then a semester working on the National Climate Change March, she attended the University of British Columbia to study environmental policy. After her UBC graduation, she moved back to the East Coast and settled in New York City, where she stumbled upon a job listing for an urban beekeeper. She fell in love with bees and beekeeping, working as a city's urban beekeeper during 2022 and 23. She has since been promoted to Northeast lead beekeeper for Alveole, covering Boston, Philadelphia, and New York. She is studying to get her master's certificate in beekeeping from Cornell. I am absolutely delighted to introduce Madeline. Please give her a warm welcome.
Hi, my name is Madeline. Thank you for the introduction, Gloria. As she said, I am an urban beekeeper now. I work out of New York, but I oversee about 400 hives in the Philadelphia, Boston, New York area. So today I'm just going to tell you guys a little bit about what urban beekeeping is, how we see urban beekeeping in the future, and how we can bring that to our little backyards in Vermont. So first we'll start out a little bit about me, then a little bit about honeybees. I'm going to get kind of in depth about bee anatomy and things like that, so please try not to get overwhelmed and ask questions at the end because it gets a little crazy and complicated. We'll go into urban beekeeping specifically, the debate on native bees and how urban beekeeping relates to that, colony collapse, and then personal beekeeping. So these are me. How did I go from that to posing on rooftops with bees covering me, not wearing a shirt? So I started beekeeping with my dad when I was younger. Always loved bees, but never really thought about making it a career. The thing that I think is the hardest hurdle to get over as a beekeeper is being comfortable with bees. It's really easy, it's not really easy, but it's easier to learn techniques about beekeeping. It's really hard to be okay with 2,000 bees all over you at any given time and being able to work through that and explain what you're doing while that's happening. So I attribute my childhood of constantly being stung by bees to being comfortable around them. As Gloria said, I then went to the University of British Columbia. I studied environmental policy. I came back to New York and honestly thought the job description was a bit of a joke because I get to be a beekeeper in New York. But I applied. Last year, I had about 40 clients working throughout all of Manhattan on beehives. And this year, now I manage the 3 cities and about 400 hives now. So, some bee basics. There used to be a native honeybee in North America. It was called the Apis neararctica. It disappeared. Nobody really knows why or how, and the only reason we know it ever existed was because we found that fossil in the Stewart Valley Basin in Nevada. But it doesn't exist anymore, and it hasn't for a very long time. The honeybees that we know and love today, Apis mellifera, are not native to the United States, but have been here since about the 1600s. Apis mellifera is the European honeybee. They evolved from wasps shortly after flowering plants came onto Earth about 130 million years ago. As I said, they were brought over in the 1600s with pigs and apples, which I think is kind of funny because like the American foods are bacon and apple pie, all made with those 3 ingredients. And the cool part about honeybees, and one of the reasons why they evolved from wasps, was because they work as a superorganism. So yes, there are tens of thousands of individual bees, sometimes hundreds of thousands, crawling all over you in one house, but they all work together as one central system. So the technical definition of that is an organized society that functions as an organic whole. However, I like to think about it as one being working together. The other way that they have evolved from wasps is that they work out of eusociality, which is 3 main components. We've got overlapping generations. So the queen lays all the eggs. I'll get into her specifics in a bit, but all the sisters raise each other. And sisters who were born 30 days ago, well, 14 days ago, are still raising babies, and then it's all part of that system. So it doesn't matter who mothered, technically, the babies. All the sisters take care of each other, and the few brothers in there. Cooperative brood care, as I said, a bunch of the bees take care of all of the babies. When a worker bee is 4 to 12 days old, she is a nurse bee, and she's taking care of all of those eggs. And then we've got the reproductive division of labor, which is that mom is queen, and she lays every egg, and worker bees, sisters, cannot lay viable eggs for the hive. In Apis mellifera, we've got a few different types. This gets a little complicated. When we first brought bees over to the United States, they were Apis mellifera. That's the German black bee. It's not really that common today in the United States at all. Now we work mostly with Apis mellifera, I'm forgetting the word, but it's the Italian honeybee. There's a lot of different melliferas out there. But they are the most docile, all the way up to the Russian honeybee, which is the most aggressive that we work with today. And I totally get the irony with that one. Italian honeybees, I like to say, because Italian winters are super chill, not that bad, right? Not that long, not that cold. So honeybees don't really have to be aggressive because they just don't have a lot that they're defending. We have a few different types sprinkled in there, but the most aggressive that we use for honeybee keeping is the Russian honeybee. And if you think about it, the Russian winter is long and it sucks and it's cold. And so they have to be aggressive because they have a lot to protect. One little snap and the entire colony breaks apart, while an Italian bee has way more room to recover. So genetically, an Italian honeybee is the most friendly. That's the type of bee that I use as a beekeeper for the most part. A Russian honeybee is what you're going to use if you are more like a commercial beekeeper, because they're popping out honey faster than any other bee pretty much. Another bee that you guys may be familiarized with is the African honeybee, or an Africanized bee. It is actually an African bee, which is not here, mated with the Apis mellifera in the 80s by a human, not naturally. And it kind of took over, and that's the super aggressive killer honeybee that you may have heard about. It's not up north here yet. The most north that they've seen it is South Carolina. But that's what that is. It's an artificially mated bee that someone made. and then let loose. So why do I work with the honeybee? Why does anybody work with the honeybee? They are one of the only things that are completely net positive for the environment. Yes, they take nectar, which is kind of necessary, and they give back so many different things for both the planet and for ourselves, for our own use. I'll get back into the specifics of those, but pollination, honey, royal jelly, propolis, there's a ton of things that honeybees give back to us. They are also the most efficient pollinator. Honeybees, an entire colony, can pollinate about 3 million flowers per day if they're strong. They fly a 3-mile radius, and they do that 3 times a day, each of the foragers. As opposed to a native bee, most of them only move about 300 yards a day-ish. So you've got a huge difference for how much honeybees can cover and where they can live versus a native bee. They're also super cute. And so when we are talking about environmentalism, we like to focus on cute animals like the polar bear. It gets people's attention, they fall in love with that thing, and then they want to fight for that animal's survival. Honeybees, in my opinion, are the same way. You can let them crawl on you, you get honey out of them, and they just look really furry and adorable. And so they're a really easy way to get people engaged with environmentalism. So we're going to break down the hive a little bit. We've got 3 different members of every honeybee hive. There's the worker. About 95% of a beehive are worker bees. They are female. They are the ones that are stinging. They're making honey. They're taking care of babies. They're collecting pollen, nectar. They're doing everything, including deciding how the colony really works, how it moves, if it's going to recreate itself, things like that. If they need a new queen, that's all the worker's decision. The queen is the one that pumps out babies. She is only there to lay eggs, and the only decision she really makes is if the egg is a male or a female. The rest is all up to the workers. And then lastly, we have the drone. Those are the male bees. They make up less than 5% of the hive. They cannot sting, they cannot make honey. They are kind of just there to bop around and get fed, and then they mate and they die. And I love telling the finance bros that in New York because they get really uncomfortable. So the queen, when she gets mated, people always ask me what my favorite fact about bees is, and this might be one of them. She is born out of a queen cell, which I'll show you guys in a second. When she is born, she's a virgin, and she looks like that little bee. It's kind of hard to tell the difference between her and the other ones. She then goes out on a mating flight where she mates with about 40 to 70 different males, and she collects all the sperm in her spermatheca and spits some of it out so that she has the most diverse genetic pool in her at any one time, and mixes all the sperm up. As the drones mate with her, they literally die when they pull out, so she is collecting as much as she can in that cloud of drones above her. And then she comes back into the hive, and if there were no beekeepers, she would literally never see the light of day again. Unless she swarms, which I'll go into in a second, but that's kind of rare. But she just lives in the hive and lays eggs and doesn't go out again. She's actually too heavy to even fly. So how are these all born? Once she gets back into her hive, she lays eggs. If she lays a fertilized egg, it becomes a worker bee. That's that photo up there. And you can tell that because the brood, where the babies are cooking in there, is flat. When she lays an unfertilized egg, it's a male, it's a drone, and that's where you can see all the bubbles down there. That's all drone brood being born. And then, if the worker bees hate her, or they want to swarm, which again I'll get into in a second, or they just want a little backup, or she's dead, they'll scoop out an egg, a fertilized worker egg, and put it in what's called a queen cup, which is that little peanut thing, and they only feed it royal jelly. So the difference between what the other bees are fed and the queen is that everyone gets royal jelly. I'll go into the specifics of that. Sorry, it's a little complicated. but only the queen gets only royal jelly. Workers and drones get a mixture of royal jelly with bee bread, which stunts a worker's reproductive system. So that's why girl bees in the hive, the workers, can't have babies, because their reproductive system has literally been wrung out by pollen. But the queen with only royal jelly allows her entire reproductive system to grow, and it allows her to live longer. A queen can live up to 7 years, while a worker bee lives 30 days, and a drone bee lives about 45. So as I've said, I've mentioned swarms a few times. Another time that they will make these queen cups, you can see them all dripping from the bottom of that frame there, is when a swarm is about to happen. Yes, the hive is making babies all the time, but a swarm is the birth of another superorganism. So it's actually when your hive is most healthy, it's going to swarm. So it's a good sign. It's just cities and people don't love looking at them because they look really scary, but they are a really good thing. So that's when the workers will grab a bunch of eggs and put them into queen cells, and the first one to hatch will go and sting all the other cells so that none of them are born. And she will then, she is a virgin in there, and before that, right before she hatches, the original queen will leave with half the hive. So that virgin is born into a slightly smaller colony, and then you've got 2 colonies of the same genetics, basically. So swarms look scary because then they ball in random spots, and you have to wait for them to either leave or a beekeeper to come catch them. But they're actually the most healthy thing that a hive can do. So they're really exciting for personal hives, but very scary and annoying for an urban beekeeper. So now we'll go into the main parts of what bees give us, why we love honeybees. Royal jelly is, I think, the most expensive thing coming out of a hive. It is a white goo that is secreted from their pineal gland. It's sugars, proteins, fatty acids, amino acids, vitamins, and salts. And as I said, it is necessary for all honeybees to develop. So if you find a frame of eggs and they're all dried out, you can't see any royal jelly in there, you know that hive is probably going to die. As I said, they allow the queen to live longer by stimulating cellular pathways. Most of the time that you guys have probably seen them, no offense, is in anti-aging products. It's the main ingredient in almost all anti-aging products, and it's the reason why it's so expensive. It's also really hard to harvest. As you can see, it's so blurry because bees are very small, and that's not a lot of royal jelly. The second main item that we eat out of the hive is bee bread. We eat straight pollen from the hives, but bee bread is what bees do with pollen. It's packed with protein. It's bees' main source of protein. It is, again, how the worker bees' reproductive systems get stunted. It contains all 22 known essential nutritional elements for humans. So if you're ever in a tough situation, just eat a bunch of pollen and you'll be good to go. Protein in the pollen can vary from 5 to 40%. If the pollen is less than 20%, it's not seen as a great source of protein, but if it's more than 25%, it's seen as an excellent source of protein. And one larva of worker bee or drone needs about 1 full cell of pollen or bee bread to fully develop. So you can see all those. The one on the left is mostly ragweed or goldenrod, a little mix of both, and it's very bright. It's very pretty. Pollen is collected on their legs. We like to call them pollen pants. That's when you can see the little balls on bees' legs. And it's actually kind of an afterthought for bees to collect. It just sticks to the hairs on their legs. They're mostly out there for the nectar, and pollen is kind of just an added bonus. Pollen getting into honey is also just an accident. It's just like the dust coming off of their legs. That's how you can tell, like, teeny bits of pollen are so powerful because it can flavor our honey so easily. Speaking of honey, in one bee's entire life, she'll make about 1/12 to 1/4 of a teaspoon of honey. So when you buy your $4 bottle of honey, you might want to think about it because the $20 bottle is actually probably real honey. A lot of fake honey has corn syrup in it, or they pump their bees full of sugar syrup to get that honey moving faster, but it doesn't have the antimicrobial and like the enzymes from bees' bellies in it. So that honey is just not nearly as good for you, and it doesn't have your local pollen in it. The cool part about honey, and another way you can tell if you have fake honey, is that it will never go bad. So if your honey ever gets moldy and you haven't touched it, that just means it's not real honey. We can eat honey out of pharaoh's tombs, and we have, and it's totally no problem. It might crystallize. We have honey jars here, first come, first serve, from New York City, and it is crystallized. That just means it like kind of hardens because the sugar content is so high. It's 17.8% water or less. So it crystallizes, and all you gotta do is heat it up and it will liquefy again. Honey is made by bees eating nectar from flowers, and then they put it in their little bee belly, and then they throw it up into other worker bees' bellies a bunch of times, and those bee enzymes mix with the liquid and get it to that special honey thing that we can't recreate. The only time we've ever figured out recreating it is from this certain type of mushroom. It's a really wasteful process, but it has that same enzyme in it. And that's how you get like real vegan honey, is that mushroom enzyme stuff. But it's very wasteful and not nearly as good for the planet as bees are, so don't eat it. Yeah, so they throw it up into each other's bellies, and then they eventually throw it up into the cell, and they get the water out of it either by fanning their wings or vibrating or things like that. And it gets to 17.8% water, which they test with their tongues, and then they cap it over with wax. So you can see that middle frame. You can see the texture that's like kind of like wonky is all open, and then the part that's like more solid, that's honey. And once it's capped over, you don't have to worry about it at all. It could be covered in blue mold, but you can still eat that honey underneath it because it's totally fine. Yeah. Propolis is another common item in the beehive. It's my personal favorite. It's made from resin, and the bees collect it again on their legs. But instead of storing it as bee bread, they make it into glue. And that glue is antibacterial, antifungal, antimicrobial, and anti-inflammatory. So they use that glue to close their hive up, which is why we have to use these tools. It's called a hive tool to pop the hive open. They also use it to trap little pests. My dream is to see some beekeepers will find balls of propolis at the bottom of their hive, and it's actually a mouse that they covered in propolis so that the bacteria from the mouse wouldn't spread. They stung it to kill it, and then they covered it. So they're pretty good at that. Also, I chew it all the time. It's crazy good for you. Yeah, it's probably the best thing for your body as humans to eat. And yeah, as humans, we also used to use it as glue. Last but not least is wax. Wax, not a lot of people know, but the stripes on bees are not actually just stripes, they're slits, and wax oozes out of it. They then take that from their bellies and chew it up and then form honeycomb. Honeycomb, the sides of it are the exact length of bees' antennas. That's how they measure it every time. That's why they're called like nature's little architects. There's no nutritional value of wax to eat for humans or bees, but the energy needed to create 1 pound of wax is the same amount of energy for a bee to create 8 pounds of honey. So wax takes a lot of energy, which is why a lot of beekeepers will save their wax throughout the years so that the bees don't have to go through the effort of remaking it every year. Beeswax candles do not harm our bodies when we burn them. So if you like to burn candles in the winter, beeswax isn't going to hurt your lungs like, say, an oil-based candle or things like that. And the use of beeswax dates back to about 9,000 years ago when humans switched to agricultural lifestyles. We mostly used it for waterproofing things, and obviously we still do. So that's most of honeybee facts. Native and wild bees I'll start explaining in this next section. Native bees means a bee that is native to here. There are 4,000 different types of bees in America that are native and 20,000 in the world. Honeybees obviously is not one of the ones native to here. A wild bee just means a bee that isn't looked after at all. So there are wild honeybees. It's just probably swarms that people have lost years back. And native honeybees obviously all live in trees, enclosures, because they can't really protect themselves and they have to survive the winter in those colonies. But a native bee is going to be nesting in soil, cavities, wood, their own made hives. So we've got paper wasps, yellow jackets, things like that. I've had a few people tell me about the yellow jackets in the ground that they've run over with their lawnmowers, which sucks. And native bees have different preferences depending on who they are. Most of that depends on their tongue shape. A longer tongue, like a bumblebee or a leafcutter, will go for more tubular plants like a honeysuckle, while short tongues like mining or plaster bees prefer flowers like daisies. Native bees naturally just prefer native plants though, just because that's what they've been eating since the beginning of time. And a little fun fact is that all bees can't see red, so you won't see a lot of bees on red flowers. And flowers change their shape and their look to bees than humans. So a bee's eye sees almost all flowers as targets, and they've just evolved together to look like that. So we see flowers very differently than a honeybee or a bumblebee would. So now we'll go into urban beekeeping specifically. What is an urban space? This is kind of complicated because yes, I'm an urban beekeeper, but I also have hives that I work with through the company I work for in the middle of fields, in the middle of nowhere, but we are still an urban beekeeping company. We've got green roofs. This is in Weehawken, New Jersey. So the idea of an urban space is pretty loose. So when I talk about urban beekeeping, I'm more talking about spaces that are active with people. I work with a company that only works with corporate buildings, so we mostly work in really high up offices and like malls and things like that. Well, you could argue there's urban beekeeping technically here, but I'm mostly referring to like New York City, Philadelphia, Boston, really, really urban areas. These are some iconic buildings that I have kept bees at. The one on the left is the Empire State Building. It's on the 6th floor, so it's not nearly as exciting as it sounds, but it's pretty cool. The next one in is right near Grand Central Station. It is 120 Park, I believe. The next one in, obviously, as you can see, it's right near One World Trade. It's at the Brookfield Property Center. And then the one all the way to the right, I'm not sure if everyone has heard of it, but it's Stuytown. It's this community in Lower East Side, and they actually have 10 hives. That's our only residence in all of Manhattan is on Stuytown. How is beekeeping in urban spaces different? We've got a few main differences that we have to deal with rather than when you're a backyard beekeeper. Number one is bee forage. This is like a common debate right now between people about if urban spaces have enough forage, which means food for bees, or if we are kind of setting bees up to suffer. I'll answer that in a second. We're not letting them suffer. The next one would be less physical space. Sometimes I have a huge courtyard like that I get to work in, and sometimes my space for a hive or two hives is like this big, like from me to that thing. So I have nowhere to put the boxes, or I have to hold them up and have someone come with me, or things like that. Another one is more engagement, as opposed to here when I work at my parents' house. I am alone or with one or two people, but when I'm on rooftops, I can have 50 people surrounding me asking me a million questions at once. And you have to also keep in mind not letting people get stung while you're doing that. And then dealing with not only personal preference, but city laws, company rules, things like that. You have to register your hive with the city and the state. there are certain buildings that you're not allowed to step foot outside of the office doors, like onto setbacks, so you have to get security clearances for that. And then people hate looking at bees all day in some offices, so you have to move them sometimes because someone once got stung and it hurt them, and so now they don't want to be near them. So there's a lot of different actors that you have to work with. And then lastly, these hives are all public. Like, as you can see from these 2 hives, you can see like 6 different buildings can look over them. So people call 311 all the time complaining that there are beehives there, wondering if they're legal, wondering if they're safe, things like that. I had to go to a health inspector call just 2 weeks ago because someone called and said a building next door to theirs had a beehive and they didn't know if it was legal. So you have to work with a lot of different people on that end. A lot of people right now are talking about urban beekeeping in the sense of, is it good or is it bad? A lot of people have very good points for both sides. I'm not necessarily arguing one side or another. I'm just kind of going to talk about each point and walk through what we do at the company I work for and what I believe in is right for urban beekeeping. So honeybees, as I said, are the most efficient pollinators. They can fly a 3-mile radius. So when you have a hive on the 25th to 44th floor, a native bee physically can't get up there to get to the forage, the greenery, to pollinate, right? They can't deal with the wind to go up those buildings, while a honeybee is just a little bit stronger, so they can handle that. Green roofs are super popular. They're getting bigger and bigger in New York. This is actually 75 Rock, I think, or 30, right around Rockefeller Center. This green roof is there, and it's beautiful. But those clovers can't get pollinated unless pollinators can get up there. The other really cool part about urban beekeeping is that we get to work with people who aren't already engaged with nature to engage with nature. So when I moved from Vermont to New York, I constantly get crazy questions that I think are so common sense, like, why don't you need a rooster to get a chicken? Or, you know, things like that. Where to me, I'm like, obviously this is so clear, but other people just don't understand it. And so getting to explain these nature facts to people who obviously it's not common sense and it doesn't necessarily need to be, getting to explain these things to them is really fun and really cool and works towards our larger goal of having people more environmentally conscious. The amount of people that, when I first bring in the bees, have literally said to me, I never want to like see you here. I've had a woman say I would never be friends with a beekeeper, like to my face when I'm holding 100,000 bees. To by the end of it, coming out to the hive with me and holding bees and getting to play with them and loving them is amazing. It's a really cool thing that we get to do to show people how cool bees are. And then the next year they're like, we want flowers because the bees are hungry, or we want a green roof because it's pretty and then we'll enjoy our beehives, or things like that. It really is the start of something. We like to call honeybees the gateway pollinator, because once they're in, you can get away with a lot more, which is exciting. Why is beekeeping in urban spaces bad? We've got competition for native bees. Again, the amount of forage throughout the city. This is a big argument. Honeybees and native bees don't fight at all, but there is a finite amount of food that they are all working towards. We've got the public eye. People hate looking at bees. They hate getting stung by bees, understandably so. And they hate swarms. This swarm right here is in Long Island, or Staten Island, at the mall, right outside of the Guess Jeans store, and or Levi's or something. And this was just like a Saturday that I had to go scoop up the bees, and it's not fun, and people don't love it, and they run by screaming because they're scary. When in reality, swarms are actually in their most friendly state. You can scoop them up with your bare arms, which I do all the time, and they just don't sting you. But yeah, they're scary and they're not fun to look at, and they interrupt a lot of things. I had to get a swarm a couple weeks ago because it was at a construction site and they couldn't keep doing work with the swarm there. So it would have cost them a lot of money if I couldn't get there in time. And then urban beekeeping is argued as a less natural way of beekeeping. This I will go into in a second, but when we think of natural beekeeping, we think of, you know, no chemicals, old white man in a white suit with a cigar in a field, alone beekeeping, and that's just definitely not what I look like on a daily basis. So yeah, urban beekeeping doesn't look like how people picture beekeeping should look, and that is also a scary thought. Some popular articles that have been popping up that have to do with this, the beekeepers who don't want you to buy more bees, is beekeeping wrong? This one's just funny, and it was sent to me a lot, but ripped, hot, and in your 50s, you're now officially beekeeping age. And so these three articles I've been asked about a lot, and I'm just going to go into their two main arguments for them. And one is that natural bees and honeybees compete with each other and that adding more beehives is bad. And the other thing is that we don't look beekeeping age, and that the natural beekeeping isn't what it used to be. As you can see, natural beekeepers leave their bees alone, which is also not what we do. So, native bees versus honeybees. People talk a lot about competition for forage. However, in my experience as a beekeeper, I don't see honeybees as being competition for native bees. As I've said, we do have enough forage in these urban spaces right now. The real downfall of native bees is humans. So climate change, urban heat island effect, things like that. Monoculture will really screw over native bees because you have so much of one nutrient in one space, it's impossible to move on to a new nutrient. It's really hot all the time. Bees start to get angry at 95 degrees, and it was way more than 95 a lot of days this summer, which is not fun as a beekeeper, and it kills native bees a lot of the time because they don't have the community to cool themselves down. Honeybees work in kind of an AC system where they can fan their wings and work together and get some airflow in there. Solitary native bees cannot do that, so they just don't have the help or the community for things like that. And then just less green spaces, less spots for native bees to pop around to, and less safe places for them to live and sleep. Wild bee hotels are really popular right now. The company I work for has a new package where we install a bunch of them, which is really cool, but it's hard for the native bees to get from one to another because there's just not a lot of green spaces. It's spread out. It's a random flower in some window box here and a random stretch of flowers there, but it's just not a clear pathway for them. Another main argument from a lot of people that I meet and these articles is that kind of beekeepers, or the false narrative, I should say, that beekeepers think that they're saving the world. And I like to say I would love to ask any beekeeper if they think that they're saving the world, because I don't think any of them would say yes. I think all beekeepers are educated enough in their practice to know that having bees is not saving the world at all. It is sparking an interest in the environment. Yes, it's upping the pollinator count, but I think it's more about connecting yourself with the bees and doing something really cool and really interesting, and using bees as a launching off point to talk about things like environmentalism and climate change. But I don't think that beekeepers think that they are saving the world. And I would love to talk to one who did, so if you know of any. And then city apiary level caps. This has been debated a lot. There are a few cities, I believe Toronto is talking about getting one sooner than later. It means with all the registered hives in a city, the city will say no more. Companies like the one I work for won't be allowed to add any more hives without removing others. So that is something that I think is really cool and definitely a really good answer for overpopulating with honeybees. It's just not legally in the system yet, but it probably will be in the next few years, especially with Canadian cities who seem to be one step ahead of us, usually. The argument for natural beekeeping. So as I said, a lot of people don't picture me on their rooftop when they ask where the beekeeper is. I am very proud to be a beekeeper. I love being a beekeeper, and I love the community that I'm surrounded with. It's a lot of young people, a lot of people part of the LGBTQ community, a lot of people part of the POC community, and it's growing really, really fast. And I think romanticizing that idea of older people alone in fields is a little dangerous, especially when we want to make our cities greener and safer. We're going to need some young, excited people to help that. So I don't love the demographic argument there. Treatment. A lot of people say natural beekeeping should leave bees alone, let them do their thing. Totally. Except for 99.99% of hives in the US have something called the varroa mite, which is a tick type thing. It sucks all of the fat out of bees, and it is the cause for a lot of colony collapse. And it's really scary and can bounce from bee to bee on flowers, so it spreads really, really fast. So yes, in an ideal world, we wouldn't need to use chemicals on hives, but in an ideal world, we wouldn't need a lot of medicines that we do now. So I am pro-treatment. And then last would be swarms. As I said, swarms are the healthiest thing your hive can do. It's awesome. We like to call them healthy problems when we get a swarm call. But it's something that I need to manage as a beekeeper. I need to cut swarm cells when I see them to make sure those queens aren't born, because then you get things like this, which is 6 a.m. on a Saturday, which I don't want to be doing every Saturday, and companies don't want to be dealing with. So those are my arguments against those people who say that we should get back to natural beekeeping. So today, things that are scaring me and other beekeepers. Uneducated beekeepers, I think, is number one. 75% of beekeepers are first-year beekeepers because people get so discouraged because their colony dies and then they give up. It's scary because it can lead to the spread of a lot of disease. It can lead to a lack of, or the end of a loving relationship with bees. And it is just not safe for the little guys. So please, if you are a beekeeper, get educated. If you want to be a beekeeper, educate yourself. It's definitely something that I get worried about, especially when I'm in these corporate buildings and people are like, oh, I'm going to buy a hive tomorrow. And I'm like, please don't, you don't know what you're doing. Next would be disease. They are spreading rapidly. That is a wild bee, and honestly, I forget what kind it is, but all those little red nuggets on it are mites, those mites I was just talking about. I've never seen more than 2 mites on a bee, and that's insane, but diseases are spreading, and they're spreading fast, and so we have to stay on top of those. Climate change, as I said, monoculture is really scary. Also for things like almond fields, where you'll ship out bees to go pollinate the almonds, the hive transportation is really disruptive to bees. And so that giant industry is killing hives or colonies every time it's doing a big move. So that's not ideal. Wintering bees, I'm sure we all remember we used to be able to ski Thanksgiving weekend, now we can't anymore. The reason why bees are dying is not because it's getting colder throughout the winter, it's because our winters are really not stable at all. So our 70-degree day in January that we've been getting around here almost yearly, the bees go out, but then it drops to 30 that night and they die. When honeybees winter, they winter in a cluster about the size of a basketball, and they keep the queen warm 95 degrees the entire winter. they make these special things called winter bees, which are genetically made to keep the queen warm, to live longer than 30 days. They live about 6 months, and they actually are genetically made not to poop for 6 months because they don't like to keep the hive dirty, so they hold it and then they all go out in the spring. So that's why there's always a lot of bee poop everywhere in the spring. But yeah, so once that cluster breaks up, the queen dies pretty much immediately. And once queen is dead, the hive dies right after that in the winter. And lastly, pesticide use. I've come across 3 or 4 hives this year so far that have been poisoned by pesticides. You can tell a hive has died unnaturally because its tongue is the bees have their tongues sticking out. So usually it's pesticide or mite related. But yeah, those pesticides are scary for bees, and they are definitely not thought about when there's a bigger threat in the area. Something like the lanternfly, which is totally taking over at least New York and Philly so far. There's one brand of it, and I forget which one, that does actively kill the bees that land on it. And there are a few that are safe, but when something scarier is in the area, it's hard to focus on protecting the bees as well. And then hive washing, relying on honeybees to make up native bee numbers. We have some clients sometimes who will get a little freaked out and be like, I want 6 hives on my roof after 1 year of one. And it's educating people to understand that 1 hive is good, but 6 hives is not going to do that much more for the environment. In fact, 6 hives in a row is probably not great on an urban rooftop. So understanding and starting that narrative of, okay, you have 1 hive, let's add some native bee protection in there, and not just relying on more is more. What's making me excited about beekeeping? Colony collapse disorder numbers are going way down. It was a big issue in 2008. It's when all those articles came out and the Save the Bee campaign happened. Colony collapse is when basically most of your colony leaves, goes somewhere and dies, and they leave a very small amount of bees, probably about 2,000 left with the queen to just die out slowly. It's used to be quite common, less common now, very scary and very sad for beekeepers. But again, that number is going down because people are more aware of it, and that big campaign happened. People love bees now. I think every single day I see someone with a bee t-shirt or a bumper sticker or a pin or a sticker or something saying that they love bees. And I know I'm gifted a lot of those things too lately. But watching people love bees so much and get so excited when I tell them what I do is really cool. And it's really exciting that people are so eager to learn about them. Bee vaccines just started being tested this past winter for the mite, so that's awesome. They're working on things like that. And then the changing dynamics of beekeeping and beekeepers. It's really cool to see so many different companies and beekeepers out there doing really cool things that definitely bend what you thought a beekeeper was. So I love watching that, and I love getting to hang out with those people. So what can you do as either a beekeeper or a non-beekeeper, and more importantly, probably someone who doesn't live in an urban space? If you want a hive, I suggest you get a mentor, you register your hive, and you love your bees and take them seriously. It scares me when people start bees and kind of treat it as more of an art project and rather than animal husbandry. It sucks when they die. It's killing tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of beings. And I think it's important to take that more seriously than it seems like some people do. So yeah, get a mentor, register your hive, and love your bees. Oh, also bees have facial recognition and generational knowledge. So your bees know you, and they know you for generations to come. That's why there's that tradition of telling your bees when someone has died, or saying goodbye to your bees, because they know exactly who you are, and they know that you are trying to take care of them if you're nice to them. I have hives that I've gone into for the first time with coworkers and had a rough day, And every single time I go back to them, I get stung, and he never gets stung because they knew me from the beginning, and I was a little aggressive at the beginning, and now they don't like me. So, if you're nice to your bees, they'll be nice to you. If you don't want a hive, or you still want to do something cool, you should mow your lawn less. Native bees overwinter and take naps and hang out in taller grasses. So running over it with a lawnmower, it's not great for them. Don't use pesticides, but if you do, look at their effect on bees. Some pesticides you're supposed to only spray at night, because then by the time the morning comes, they're not toxic for bees anymore. Things like that. Make pollinator gardens by letting your lawn grow. As you can see on the left, there's like tall grass in the middle, and then the lawn is mowed around it. So they're kind of like these little bubbles of native plants that native bees can hop to make their lives a little bit easier, and they make your lawn look kind of fun and beautiful with the flowers. Plant diverse plants. Bees need lots of different nutrients, and lots of different bees need lots of different nutrients. So a bunch of different flowers is going to be best, especially native flowers, to get your local bees buzzing around. Tell someone how cool and important all types of bees are. People get really excited by random bee facts. And so once you tell it to them, they go home and Google it, and it's very cool. And lastly, show someone a photo of a cute bee, because they're so cute. And then people will fall in love with them, and then they'll become a beekeeper. Thank you. We'll do questions now, if people have any. Yes, we've got a few. One second.
You said that they transport the bees to the almonds.
Mm-hmm.
Why don't they just have bees there?
Yeah, so it's commercial beekeeping, where people can keep thousands of hives at their apiary and look after them year after year. And then they go to an almond farm when almonds are blooming, and then they drive to avocados when those are blooming, and they bounce around. And they don't have enough space to have a bunch of apiaries at the farms, and those farms only bloom once a year because it's just one plant. So it would be a lot of work for the beekeeper to have to feed the bees throughout the year when the other things aren't blooming, and have to travel all that way. There's a very good documentary about it on Amazon that I forget the name, but I can Google it. Other questions?
The statistics last year were somewhere around 50% of the hives were lost during the year, either winter and summer. What's your experience in the urban setting with losses?
Last year we had, just in my company alone, those are the only numbers I know, we had a really bad, we had a fine overwintering rate. It was about 65%, but the right before winter is when we lost all of our other hives. I want to say we had like 40% survival late fall, and that was because we sourced our bees from down south. They were mite-ridden and not ready for this climate. So my take is a little biased, but it was really bad. But so far this year, we've had 7 hive deaths up until now, which is out of, well, I guess 10 hive deaths out of about 400 hives. So we're feeling good, but we'll see how we go after winter. One second. I think we're doing the microphone. Hi.
Can you talk a little bit about whether you have to go up and recruit corporations to put the hives on, or do they start coming to you? How does all that work?
Yeah, the company I work for, Alveol, has a whole sales team, and they reach out to buildings usually, and we'll usually like get one, say, JP Morgan building, and then we'll get 20 the next year. But yeah, usually our sales team reaches out to people, but sometimes we'll get people asking us about it, and we just report them in. but word of mouth goes a long way, and competitions between buildings. A lot of buildings are in competition with each other, and they'll be like I probably shouldn't drop names. I have 2 building entities that make a lot of videos of me and put them up on TikTok, and they, like, one will put out one, and then like the next one will book me for a video the next day, and they like, yeah, so that's funny.
Yeah. So I think you went to Bremerton.
Yes.
So have you thought about doing this at Bremerton? You know, coming and talking to like our sustainability classes down at
I would love to.
or-
Yeah, I did Mountain Campus too. I would love to do that.
You're so
Yeah.
awesome. So you probably have an email somewhere, right?
Yeah, I'll talk to you after and get you. Yeah.
Because I'll give you the names of the people that I think would be the best for you to connect with.
Perfect.
Versus me, but
Okay.
I know some of those other people.
Perfect. Sounds
Yeah.
good.
Yeah.
Oh.
Now, you said the bees are up on top of these high buildings, skyscrapers, basically. How high can a bee go comfortably?
We cap it at 50. Our tallest one is the 44th floor. We have one on the 44th, one on the 42nd, and the rest are all below 35. I don't love installing bees above 30 floors, personally.
You say that you should register. Explain that, please.
Yeah, so through your state or through your city, depending on where you live, you just send in information about your hive, where the hive is, how many hives you have, who's the contact number for it, and then they have a system. And so when there's a spread of a disease like AFB, it's a really scary spread disease, it's a fungal disease, they can call up all the hives within a 3-mile radius and be like, you need to go check on your hive. Because if they find that in a hive, you have to burn the hive alive. So it's like a really, you don't want it to spread as much as possible.
So, and that's through the conservation agency, or?
It's just the state health. In New York, it's at health.nyc.gov. Yeah. Yeah.
We have a question online.
Yeah.
So the online question, do you think urban beekeeping has different challenges as compared to rural or suburban beekeeping? For example, are diseases and competing insects like hive beetles and verona mites less of a problem in the city?
Diseases, I would say, are probably more of a problem because you've got a higher concentration in a smaller area. Mites are definitely a problem. Again, higher concentration of bees in a smaller area. That's the nice part, is we don't really have any issues with hive beetles unless they're on the ground. Hive beetle is a tiny little beetle that if the hive isn't strong enough, it'll completely like goo up the hive and make it slippery and slimy and disgusting and kill them eventually. So that's something you don't have to worry about when you're working with hives that are higher up than the floor or the ground.
Okay, so you're not supporting the company just on the sale of honey, are you? What is the business model, and where does the revenue come from to support the company?
This talk is not affiliated with the company. I just need to say that before I answer the question. But yeah, so our company's main goal is to connect people with nature. So they rent hives from us, basically. They pay us to install these hives. We maintain them every 3 weeks from March to November. In November, we'll wrap them up for winter. And then throughout the year, we'll put on educational things for them, workshops too for client. And then they also get 100 jars of honey, which are that big, which like a hive could make more honey, but we work in like, it's called social beekeeping. It's more based on education. So yeah, our main goal is, and the reason why we use Italian honeybees is because they're docile. They don't make a ton of honey, but they're really good to teach people about bees. So that's the main goal.
We have another online question. How do you provide water to your bees on top of a skyscraper?
Yeah, legally in New York City, you do need to provide your bees with water. It's a mason jar with, I wish I had a photo of it, with just like this little thing called a Boardman feeder. It's like a mason jar with holes poked in the flat part. and the water just drips, and you like slide it to sit on the outside of a hive. I don't know. I might have a hive with a photo of it in here. I don't think I do. Oh yeah, right there. Those little guys. Yeah, so we just refill those every time that they're there. Bees don't need water. The reason why you see a lot of dead bees around water, though, is because the most elderly bee is a water gatherer. It's in her last 3 to 4 days that she's gathering water. So a lot of bees die when they're getting water because they're a little weak, but that's just to keep them happy. It's not necessary, but for New York, legally it is necessary.
What's the lifespan of a bee?
30 days for a worker, 45 for a drone, and up to 7 years for a queen.
I'd like to know where do bees fit within the food chain? For example, do they provide forage fodder for larger birds, for example?
I don't think anything real. I think seagulls might eat bees, but not that often. I think random things eat them, again, not that often, honeybees specifically. If anything, they're just providing more food by pollinating things, but yeah, it's a really good question. I think mostly it's humans that are killing them for the most part.
Skunks and possums and bears.
That's true, yeah. Skunks, bears, yeah, mostly after the honey, but yes, those will kill a lot. Rats will get in there and kill a few. Yeah. Yes. Oh, yeah.
Talking about the components of what they make again, the royal jelly again. What does that look like, and is it in a certain part of the hive?
It looks like white goo. It's like that little puddle, and it's only in the queen cells. It's only in, oh wait, I passed it. These like little cup things. You'll never see it just like sitting out because the bees release it out of their heads only when it's necessary. And then you'll see it in the other comb for babies, only around eggs.
And the propolis, that's all over wherever it needs to be glued and stuff?
Yeah.
That propolis, you say you chew it. Does it dissolve in your mouth? Or what dissolves it?
It's kind of like, honestly, it stains your teeth and your mouth neon yellow for the day, but it doesn't really dissolve. I usually spit it out eventually. Yeah, it's just you're chewing on just a lot of nutrients and things, but it's I wouldn't suggest like swallowing it that often. They make, Trader Joe's just came out with a propolis spray. I mean, other bee companies do, Savannah Bee Co., things like that. Trader Joe's is just the most accessible, but it's just a little spray that you spray in the back of your throat when you think you might be sick.
Another online question. I've heard ant colonies are copies of their queen, which makes them work as a unit. Are bees like that too?
Not really. Bees are less copies and more daughters. They work together so well because they're like a unit of sisters. And they do have one common goal, which is, you know, building a hive and keeping their genetics alive. Something I just learned the other day in one of my classes was you find a lot of drone brood, the boy brood, when a hive is about to die because a worker bee's like hormones kick into gear and she actually starts laying unfertilized eggs. And the reason for that is just the lack of hormones in the hive, but it's also so that they pump out a lot of boys to go and mate with a queen as their last grab at spreading their genetics. So those girls are really in for the goal of just spreading genetics and staying alive. And I think that's what brings them together so well.
Hi, I just want to make 2 comments. First of all, I found it really interesting that you're in a certificate program at Cornell. Are there more certificate programs emerging in other schools?
In beekeeping specifically? Not to toot my own horn, but this is kind of the highest level of certificate you can get for beekeeping is the Cornell program. But there are a lot of emerging like undergrad and graduate full programs. I'm not sure of any specifics, but like through an entomology degree, you can go into honeybees specifically, I think. But for like master's certificates, this is the main one. It's this one, and the University of Montana has a really good master's in beekeeping certificate.
Well, the other comment is I think it would be a great opportunity for young people to be exposed to this opportunity to learn about nature and living in an urban setting.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's really cool. And we just started opening hives in schools. So Pace High School is getting one, World School, things like that. Northeastern, Harvard, both have hives with us. So it is really cool to see more and more young people getting into it. Yeah.
So a couple things. First of all, I'm a beekeeper. And if people want information, the Wyndham Bee Association is really great in our area. They meet once a month for an open hive. And the Vermont Bee Association also has regularly online courses. They have one tomorrow night about wrapping your hives. So they're really great resources. So just FYI on that, if people are interested, there are two really great local organizations. And then second, what are you guys using to treat your varroa mites in the city?
We did Apivar first round this spring, second round of Formic about 2 weeks ago, and then we might hit it with an oxalic depending on how some really struggling hives later.
So are you finding your mite concentration is higher in the city than it is here in Vermont?
From what I've seen so far, yes, but I haven't bee kept that much here or with nearly as many hives. But compared to like our yard hives out in like rural Pennsylvania and stuff, definitely a higher concentration in the city. Yeah.
And then how many frames of honey are you typically getting?
We harvested we had like a few hives that were just not good from the get-go, but from most of our good hives, we got about 6 to 12 frames this year.
So are you subsequently feeding?
We fed weak hives about 4 weeks ago, and we fed a bunch of our hives early spring, but not all of our hives were feeding them.
So out of all your hives, how many hives are you typically feeding?
In New York, 100% in the spring. In the fall, probably 60% we fed. Boston, probably 40% fed, and Philly, probably 70 to 80% fed.
Okay.
Yeah. Post-harvest. Yeah.
I don't really have a question, but I do know that there's something really interesting that you've talked about that I think people would find interesting. Can you talk about why you are able to take care of bees without any protective clothing when most people wear protective clothing?
Yes. So we work with Italian honeybees. They are the most docile. But also we use something called a smoker, which I don't even know if I have a photo of in here. We burn untreated burlap. You can burn cork. You can burn denim, recycled denim, things like that. And a smoker just basically, it blocks bees' alert pheromones. Bees cannot hear each other, but they smell each other through pheromones and vibrations. They feel each other. So smoke just kind of covers that, kind of like if we turned up the volume super loud in here, we wouldn't be able to hear each other. So it doesn't spread the panic, and then it also makes them think that there might be a forest fire. If you kept some heavy heat on them, they would probably abscond and leave eventually, but we're only in the hive for about 20 minutes max. And it makes them swallow a bunch of honey and nectar, which anatomically, it's really hard for a worker bee to sting you when it's full of honey and nectar, because it's like if we ate 100 pounds of food and then tried to do a workout. So they are just like fat, lazier little blobs. Not to say I don't get stung, but that's why I can get away with wearing shorts and a tank top every day to work.
Isn't it something about your fear?
Yes, bees also feed off of pheromones. So if you are calm around the bees, they are calm around you. The minute your anxiety heightens, their anxiety heightens, and that's when you get them to start to become more defensive. Because they're like, why are you nervous? Now we're nervous. But if you stay calm, they're pretty chill.
Following up on my question, do you do mite checks or do you just treat as a matter of course?
We do mite checks. We did every hive, as long as they could handle it, in June. And then we do them once a day on our runs. So our runs are geographically separated. So about one every 5 to 10 hives we do a mite check on last cycle, so 3 weeks ago, and then this next set of 3 weeks. So we do it when it's needed, and then routinely about 2 to 3 times a year.
When you had that smoky day from the forest fires, how did they behave?
They stayed in. I mean, legally we couldn't be out in the hives that day, but what we found is that they kind of treated it like rain. They stayed in their hives, ate through a little bit of honey, but other than that, we didn't have any hives abscond, which is when they all leave their home. We didn't have any instances of that I've heard of.
We have an online question. Will red flowers be pollinated if bees can't see red?
I believe that they will, yes. I know roses can't or aren't pollinated by bees, but yes, red flowers will be pollinated. I think they just see them as a different color. I'll Google that.
What I thought was pretty interesting are your hives. I've never seen the roof like that.
Yeah.
And who made those?
So we have, they're actually, I dislike those roofs a little bit as a beekeeper, but these are what we just call premium roofs. They're just for clients that honestly pay a little bit more money and have a bigger package for the bees. But oh yeah, that's a smoker. But yeah, so it's just dependent on the client's interest in that. It's fine, but the flat roofs are easier to beekeep with because then you can put them on the ground and set boxes down. But both work the same. Any other questions? Yes.
So for the winter, do you wrap the hives at all with any kind of insulation?
Yeah, we wrap with a layer of R foil, which for those of you who don't know, is just like thicker, what's that stuff called? Anyway, it's just a thin layer of foil, and then we put a layer of thick styrofoam over the inner cover under the roof. And this year we are going to wrap them with their stands on to get some more airflow because the ice buildup when we took off the stands killed a few. So yeah, we're gonna wrap them this year with the stands and then the metal roof on top. Yeah. Cool. Well, thank you so much.